This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Akins. I'm with the Titusville Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the 2020 St. Johns River to Sea Loop Virtual Summit. We hope that everyone is healthy and well in these trying times. Today's presentation will be Thank You for Applying, Strategies and Tools for Securing Trail Funding, featuring presentations from Colin Moore with the City of Neptune Beach and Ken Bryan from Rails to Trails. Before we get started with today's presentation, we would like to take a moment to recognize our partners and sponsors, whom without their support today would not be possible. The City of Titusville, Play Linda Brewing Company, Titus Landings, Lisa Mosier with Coldwell Banker Coast Realty, Wild Ocean Seafood Market, Bike Florida, Days Inn by Wyndham, Coldwell Banker Coast Realty, Titusville Area Chamber of Commerce, St. Johns River to Sea Loop Alliance, Space Coast TPO, Florida Office of Greenway and Trails. Just a friendly reminder, everyone is muted this morning. So please use the chat box to ask any questions. Questions will be taken at the end of the presentation, and we are recording today's session so that we are able to share that back out after we are completed with all of our sessions. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Colin. Colin Moore, are you with me, Colin?
Hey, Erin, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Oh, okay, great.
Perfect. So I'm going to send you over the screen, and Colin Moore from the City of Neptune Beach, the floor is yours.
All right. All right, I'm pulling up my presentation right now. And I think everyone can see it, hopefully. All right.
Well, we can see it. It looks great.
Great. Well, thank you so much for letting me present today. I'm the Grant and Resiliency Coordinator at the City of Neptune Beach, and actually have just started this position in October. But before that, I spent 4 years with the City of Jacksonville in the Grants Office and also in the Parks Department as the Trail Coordinator. So my presentation today is going to look at some creative trail funding sources that I've kind of delved into over the past 4 years. And let's see. Oh, here we go. And just kind of wanted to give you an overview. The City of Jacksonville consolidated city, county, and we have a lot of potential trails in the works here. This was a map that we did when we were working with the Office of Greenways and Trails back in 2017, kind of coming up with our opportunity corridors. And I can show you, if you can see my pointer, hopefully you can. Neptune Beach is, to the east, is where I am now. And so in kind of going through these maps, we had two major areas of focus. One was downtown Jacksonville, and we had some existing trails you can see in the orange, and then the pink are all the gaps that we had. And in 2019, we actually finally got a master plan for our downtown trail system, working with a nonprofit partner, Groundwork Jacksonville. And that added a couple more lines to the downtown map. And the other big project that we were working on was something that we call the Core to Coast Loop, which actually connects the downtown trails to the trails out of the beaches, where I currently am. And this envisioned loop is about 50 miles. And what we've managed to work going through with the East Coast Greenway Alliance is this is actually going to be part of their main route to get to downtown Jacksonville. And it will add 50 miles to the total route of the East Coast Greenway. And we managed to get a resolution through City Council in 2018, and actually added a couple more miles after that resolution. We have 18 city council members with the City of Jacksonville, and just about everyone wanted the route to go through their district. So we had a couple of options down here as well. So just as an overview, well, and then most recently, our TPO did a regional multi-use trail master plan. And so this kind of shows all of our major, these aren't neighborhood trails, but this is kind of our big network. And you can see we've got 60 existing and 213 in the works. So, you know, we outside of the typical TPO funding with Sun Trail and, you know, the TAP, we have a lot of miles to try and get built. So what I wanted to go through today were some kind of outside of the box trail sources for construction. And what I wanted to look at were kind of some odd acronyms for federal funding programs, suspicious developers assumed to be evil that might contribute to trail construction, some secretly flush special interest organizations, hidden local government trust funds, and some planning documents forgotten on the shelf. And these are going to kind of be case studies. I apologize, since I can't see everyone, I'm not going to know if your eyes are glazing over, but you know, I'm definitely going to be mindful of the time, and you know, we'll try and go through these slides fairly quick. But I thought it might be interesting for folks to see some kind of different trail funding other than like your recreational trail program type applications. All right, so the first odd acronym that I kind of came across with the City of Jacksonville was the Federal Land Access Program. And, you know, this is basically funding that provides transportation access to and through federal lands. You know, a lot of times it's used for roads, but trails can also be used for this program. And, you know, you can do capital improvements, you know, including multi-use trails. So before I started with the City of Jacksonville, they had actually been awarded one FLAP grant, and that was for the St. Johns River Ferry, which is an important connection with the East Coast Greenway, and that was for operational funds for that. And you can see in the arrow where that's located, kind of in the overall network. And then in 2016, we actually got a grant to do a trail bridge connecting the City of Jacksonville Park to the National Park Service. And again, with this funding, you do have to connect to federal land. So it's either a national park or national forest or military base. And then that's where that project was located, kind of in the overall network. And this was one that I've worked with Barney Bennett with the Florida Department of Transportation and this was for a PD&E study looking at connecting our Timaquan Preserve to some city parks, and we ended up getting $1 million, and that project PD&E study is still in the works, but it will be 15 miles, you know, that will hopefully get us going for this part of the network. So the second odd acronym is the Community Development Block Grant, which, you know, is used for infrastructure also, but can be used for multi-use trails as well. You know, the way when I started with the city, we actually did internal applications for this funding, and the one that I worked on was for a downtown trail, Hogans Creek Greenway, and we actually received or utilized $830,000 for this part of the downtown trail network, and that has been constructed and is well used. That's a picture of it kind of on the top. And then this is just a random acronym that actually has nothing to do with the trails, but I just thought it was somewhat amusing that there was actually a program called CHOMP. So here's kind of an overview of those funding sources over the years that I kind of work with them. And, you know, they all add up, you know, over 3 years, over $4 million, you know, going to trails. So the next funding sources that I wanted to look at were some money that you can potentially get from developers to build trails. And, not all the time, but sometimes they actually are starting to have multi-use trails, included in their projects. But as city staff with the city of Jacksonville, I did get to comment on PUD plans, and and our code said that there must be sidewalks built to any new subdivisions if they were within less than 2 miles away from a school. So was able to get some multi-use trails built off-site from subdivisions in a couple of cases through that. And then in working with the planning department, we were also able to potentially waive mobility fees in exchange for trail construction. So again, where that arrow is, that's somewhat close to where that flap bridge was built. Worked with a developer, and you can see we really marked up his initial plans, showing where we'd like some trails to go in. And this trail was actually kind of a trail to nowhere, but we're anticipating some additional development on the other side of this creek where our power plant has recently been decommissioned. And so, kind of queuing that up for a future project. This was another developer trail that right where that arrow is, kind of in the middle of our network. And a city council member actually got actively involved in this one. You can see there's a gap just underneath that Mill Creek North subdivision and we had actually had this in our CIP for Beyond 5 for, putting in the road there for almost $2 million. But the developer planned to build the road. And at this time, there was no plans for the trail. But after we got the resolution for the East Coast Greenway route coming through, this is looking towards the west to the undeveloped subdivision. And this would be looking east, where it just kind of ended in a cul-de-sac. The developer ended up agreeing to put in the multi-use path now, so we've got that connection. And then again, that's where that connection is currently. And then these are a couple of other big developments downtown near our football stadium and on the south bank of the St. Johns River. And trails are definitely planned for both of these as well. All right, so secretly flush special interest organizations. This first one is actually one that I'm a member of, and got to know the president of JTC Running. They do a big river run downtown that they've done for 40 years, and have 10 to 20,000 people every year, and actually make quite a bit of money from that. So they have funding, online funding request form that I was directed to. And in working with our nonprofit partner, Groundwork Jacksonville, for this downtown trail master plan, they provided a $50,000 donation, which was the bulk of the cost for that master plan. And here are a couple of the other nonprofits and REI too that helped underwrite that plan. So that was a great partnership. The Cultural Council, not so much building the actual trail infrastructure, but bike racks. They've for downtown along the trails, $20,000 for these artistic bike racks, and those generally are going in almost every year through the Cultural Council. Jack's Ale Trail, I know I saw a brewery in Titusville was one of the sponsors, and they're very supportive of any events that we have trying to promote trails and trail construction. And where all these arrows are, you can see they're right next to the trail network. And the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, this is a parallel route to the East Coast Greenway. And there was a underutilized parcel that the Gate gas station had that they've donated to the city of Jacksonville. And it's right on our trail network on the East Coast Greenway. And they came up with a plan for a park and this was about 2 or 3 years ago, and we actually received funding from in the state budget last fiscal year, $550,000 to develop this into a park, and it's located right here, and it's going to be a great trailhead right on the East Coast Greenway. Hidden local government trust funds. The Environmental Protection Board, this was, one of these quasi-governmental agencies that oversaw a trust fund, and they donated to the downtown trail master plan because it goes along creeks that they're very interested in working to preserve. Again, art in public places. We have murals along our downtown trails. And this was something that I'd never heard of before coming to Jacksonville, the Perry Mutual Trust Fund, which is, I guess, a quasi-legal gambling operation that was required to donate money for infrastructure and parks in the surrounding 10-mile area around it, which was very close to that subdivision where we had the trail built. And in coming to the city of Neptune Beach, this was an interesting fund that I had come across. We had some a fund balance in our local option gas tax fund, and Neptune Beach had never used this for trails or sidewalks. The city of Jacksonville actually there's some legislation that 20% must go to bicycle and pedestrian improvements, but city of Neptune Beach had never used that. So when I saw this available, we have a pretty critical gap in the East Coast Greenway, and Public Works had actually done an estimate on what it would cost for the concrete to close that gap. So it was about 3,000 linear feet that we needed, and $75,000 was all that we needed for the cost of the concrete, and the labor was going to be in-house from Public Works. So I put together my first staff report with the city of Neptune Beach was requesting use of that amount, and showed the existing 3-foot sidewalk badly damaged, and showed the East Coast Greenway design guidelines with the width being 10 feet, and city council signed off on it, and we had a groundbreaking in December. You can see the very narrow sidewalk there, and in January construction had begun, and we're about 60% done of almost a half mile of trail of new East Coast Greenway. And again, that's right here and very close to where I live. That's would be the way that I commute to work once that's completed. So really looking forward to that. And then the last kind of creative funding sources were these planning documents that might have been done years ago and forgotten about. The TPOs obviously have lots of plans, and for our particular TPO, we had some of these transportation alternative projects that had been queued up a long time ago, specifically for school safety sidewalks. But a lot of times some other plans, like the long-range transportation plans, had envisioned roads that would be widened, and rather than building sidewalks that are just going to be torn up in 5 years when the road is widened, I was able to move that funding further west in the same area and kind of close a gap in our trail system there. And it actually adjoins one of those neighborhoods that we were working with a developer with for some internal trails, and was happy about this project because it really did shift about $1 million into a mile of multi-use trail that connected a lot of our parks and that bridge from the Flat Grant, and that's where that project is located. And even in Public Works, in working with these downtown trails, I didn't realize until I had probably been on the job for 2 years that there had actually been a PD&E study for one of our major downtown trails that had been commissioned and put on the shelf for during the recession, and people had just forgotten about it. But because we were able to find that, we were able to get that project added to the TPO's list of priority projects, and in the future we'll be in line for some transportation alternative funding for that project. And then the last huge project that we have going on in Jacksonville is a bicycle pedestrian path along the I-95 bridge over the St. Johns River. And this was a big addition to a road widening project. It's about $25 million, but we've got some additional projects added to the capital improvement plan so that there would be something to connect to when you came off that bridge, particularly on the south bank. So that added, probably $10 million for this South Bank Riverwalk extension and also a loop through the South Bank. So there's kind of an overview of all these different funding sources, and they add up to quite a lot. I mean, over $40 million, from non-typical trail funding. So that's pretty much all I've had, but I'll definitely am looking forward to hearing some questions if anyone has any questions about these at the end of the session. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. We actually had a question that came in over chat from Deborah. She says, you mentioned nonprofit partner. Deborah, would you like to elaborate on that a little more?
Hi. Yes. Well, I think as you went through the slides, you confirmed that it was very early on when you mentioned that, and I was like, oh, what does he mean? Give me some more info. And then you went through the slides. So thank you. Good information.
Oh, yeah. Sure. It was Groundwork Jacksonville. It was the main nonprofit partner for the Downtown Trail Master Plan.
Thank you. I have lots of folks asking me about alternative funding besides the Sun Trail monies. So this is very helpful.
All right, and then Joe has a question. Do you get funding from the universities like UNF?
We never received any direct funding from the universities. They have been working on their own kind of internal multi-use paths, and part of our trail network definitely goes through the UNF campus, but that's a good idea to try and do some joint partnerships with them. There are some new subdivisions going up south of UNF, and we actually got a developer to construct a multi-use trail pretty close to the UNF campus. So we were excited about that.
All right. Well, if anyone else has any questions for Colin, please hold on to them. We're going to move forward. Thank you again, Colin, for bringing the great presentation with you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Ken, excuse me, Ken Bryan, are you with me?
I am.
All right, perfect. I'm going to send you over the controls now. And the floor is yours.
Hey, I assume you can see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I'm Ken Bryan, here in Tallahassee, Florida, and it's good to be here with you today. I appreciate everybody coming in in this new format. We're all going to have lots to learn as we start to build trails in a new world. Things have changed for us. So I thought maybe one place to start would be with a little bit of a celebration. So over the last 30 years, various partners here in Florida have been building trails, and we're nearing the 10,000 acre of rail trail status. So we're within 60 acres, so about, I don't know, 5.5 miles or so away from crossing that 10,000 acre threshold. And again, that's a collection of all of our work over 30 years to get to that point. There's currently 57 different trails here in Florida, totaling 819 miles. And there's still a lot of work to be done to develop those projects that are in the pipeline right now. And talking about that brave new world, it's interesting because I don't know how you all are seeing the impact in your local community, but I can tell you, Rails to Trails Conservancy, we have trail counters throughout the country, including the state of Florida. And every one of our counts is seeing a significant increase. I was speaking with the central office of DOT just a couple of days ago, and they also are noticing that all their trail counts are going up as well. We have a website called traillink.com where you can go and you can look at maps and pictures and reviews and that sort of thing, find out where your local trail is. It's about 11 million unique users each year. Our year-to-date traffic is up 59%. People are going on the website and they're looking for places to walk and bike. I think we're all experiencing that. So in this bad time, the lemon that we have been dealt, there's the opportunity to come out of this position stronger, where folks that ordinarily weren't appreciating trails and outdoor recreation are now starting to do so. So I think hopefully we'll have the wind at our back as that goes. And so the rules are changing too, right? And so some trails are closing, some trails are just shutting down support facilities, but we're going to be figuring that out together. We do have a host of resources online for everybody to learn and share. And this is simply railstotrails.org/COVID-19. So if you want to find out what other trail managers are doing to cope with increased traffic and the COVID virus, then take a look at that. So Colin had mentioned mouths to feed. So part of my job at Rails to Trails Conservancy is to work on those programs that then you all can take advantage of. So we have set an internal goal. We're trying to double the investment available for active transportation, walking, biking, and trails. And our plan to do that is, so every 5-6 years or so, our country does a transportation authorization bill. We do them every handful of years versus every year, because if you can imagine having to get that bill passed through Congress on an annual basis, you wouldn't be able to build long-term projects. You wouldn't really be successful in building infrastructure. So the FAST Act is going to be coming to an end this year, and there have been some good conversations in that reauthorization. And so we're trying to incorporate a couple of bills into that new authorization. One is the Connecting America's Active Transportation System Act, and so that would direct US DOT to create a new grant program that would be focused on connectivity, so connecting individual trails to create useful systems, and that would create a new $500 million program for us all to then be able to have access to. The recreational trails program was mentioned earlier. There recently has been a bill filed called the Recreational Trails Full Funding Act, and that would effectively triple the amount of funding available to that program. The spending authority that was just in the budget that passed the legislature, still in line to be reviewed by the governor, has $3 million in spending authority. So if successful, that could take that $3 million program and turn it into a $9 million program. And we also expect that program to return more to its roots of providing management support. So, we always talk about acquisition and development, but this will also help with a need for management of trails. And then we also, there's a bill, Transportation Alternative Enhancements Act, that would substantially increase the amount of funding to the TAP program. Right now, I think that's at about 27% increase. And then also, Colin mentioned earlier that the FLAP program, and that too, we expect to be an increase in that program moving forward as well. So we're looking to double the investment by the federal government in walking, biking, and trails. And I think we stand a really good chance of doing that. Now, interestingly enough, Florida Forever and its predecessor program, Preservation 2000, when those programs were running on all cylinders, at $300 million a year, most of the long distance trails in Florida were purchased through that acquisition program. The Jacksonville Baldwin Trail, the East Central Regional Rail Trail, parts of the West Orange Trail, the Withlacoochee, the Van Fleet, many of those long distance trails were purchased with that funding source. But for about the last 10 years, money hasn't been flowing into the Greenways and Trails program portion of Florida Forever. So this year, although Florida Forever was only funded at $100 million, I think the important thing to point out there is, Preservation 2000 and Florida Forever for the first 7 years, the spigot was open and the money was flowing into the programs. That then dried up, and most of the funds that were allocated to Florida Forever were actually directed to specific programs within Florida Forever. Either the Florida Communities Trust was receiving small amounts of money, but it was really concentrated around the Acquisition and Restoration Council's priority list. So one of the things that just recently occurred is a new program within that called the SMALL program, Strategic Managed Area Lands. I actually forget what the second L is for. Put on that ARC list 10 rail trail projects scattered throughout the state. And so there is money for trails now within that ARC priority list. The money is now going to be flowing back to the Greenways and Trails program, although be it only at $1.5 million. I think the important threshold there is that that spigot's been turned back on, and that program has been taken out of the shelf and dusted off. And so I'm hoping that that continues to grow in the future, and we can build that program back to where it was prior to our past economic downturn. We mentioned SunTrail. So SunTrail is a very important part, but it's only, it's not as big as it looks, right? So 25 million, you take a third of that for the state's first regional priority, the coast-to-coast connector, and then you take another third for the second priority, which is of course the St. Johns River to Sea loop, and then that then the remainder third is then highly competitive and made available statewide. So although a good boost, I think we still can in the future look at increasing funding to that program as well. So one thing that we talked about, the Transportation Alternative Program, and I think that needs to be pointed out. So Florida's apportionment tends to be just under $50 million, but the state of Florida, unlike so many other states, you're required to have a match. And so the state of Florida has been making that match on behalf of cities. So that's leveraging, so that's really taken a $50 million program and it's turned it into a $60 million program. And I think that sometimes is overlooked, but that's a good boost that's also going into the trail numbers. Who knows what's going to happen with this budget, but it was a fairly trail-friendly budget this year. There was over $6 million in trail earmarks. Earlier, Colin had mentioned earmarks. Earmarks, keep in mind when you get them in the budget and you're approved by the governor, that's good. It's also a Hail Mary approach. And if you are line item vetoed by the governor, that then does put you in a position of where you are unable to be funded for a year. You know, effectively, if an earmark was going to be coming out of the state transportation trust fund and it was line item vetoed by the governor, DOT would not be able to fund you for a year because effectively they're not going to undo a governor's line item veto. So there is that year penalty if you're not successful. That doesn't affect projects that are already in the work program, but that's something you have to think about when you go for earmarks. I tell you, the trend that I've been seeing over the last handful of years is most of the earmark dollars, South Florida has really been the most successful there. Particularly a couple projects, the Ludlam Trail, the Underline, Biscayne Everglades Greenway, they've been successful in past legislature getting significant $3, $4, $5 million earmarks. So this kind of gives you a sense of the money that's flowing in for this year. The small program that I had mentioned earlier, so Trails makes a part of that. So Trails are eligible to compete in that $35 million. The Florida Communities Trust this year will be funded at $21 million. Keep in mind the Florida Communities Trust, there is language in the enabling legislation that says no less than 5% of the money deposited into the trust fund shall be used for trail systems. We look at that as a floor, not a ceiling. So money will be flowing in from that program, the Greenways and Trails program, and of course the Florida Recreation Development Assistance Program has always been very friendly to trails in the past as well. I thought it might be good just to kind of give you a sense to look at Miami and see what I'm talking about. They are really generating big dollars. And so there are all these individual trails making great gains in Miami, and they're also competing with one another, and they weren't looking at that big vision. They were looking at, yeah, we'll build out a trail network once our individual trail gets built, then we'll buy into the larger system when we're done. And that mindset has changed. And so there is a Miami-Dade Trail Alliance that consists of about 40 local agencies and trail-oriented organizations that are focused on creating this 225-mile network called the Miami Loop. And so when you start to look at how much money the Loop is collectively starting to bring in, it's really impressive. And earlier, Colin had mentioned developers. So a big part of the strategy for the underlying, and you can see $65 million worth of strategy, the Miami-Dade County has allocated, actually says City of Miami here. Actually, it is the City of Miami, I'm sorry, not Miami-Dade County. The City of Miami has allocated $50 million of their redevelopment fees. So if a piece of property is redeveloped within 1,000 foot of the underlying, then those impact fees will go towards the underlying. And of course, that gives you a revenue flow that you can then bond. So there are different build loans and stuff that you can approach the state infrastructure bank loan. So if you have these revenue flows, you can look at leveraging that so you can get your money up front and pay it back over time. The city of Coral Gables also bought into that same concept and are allocating $15 million. The overall budget for the underlying, just to give you a sense of scale, is $120 million. So just from that one mechanism, they're getting halfway there. And then also they have been successful in putting developers requiring to build portions of that are part of city code, the Miami River Greenway. So as properties along the Miami River are redeveloped, those developers are required to build their section. And over time, those pieces are now starting to collect to form useful sections of the Miami River Greenway. So that'll give you a sense of scale of the money that's in the 5-year work program. They've also embraced the concept of connectivity and connecting to their existing transit systems. So in Miami, you have several different. You have the Metro Mover, you have the Metro Rail, you have Tri-Rail. and you now have the Virgin train service. And so they're using part of their light rail money through the SMART plan. They've created a SMART trail program where they're looking at those connections that will connect the Miami Loop into their transit system. And they're building out a 5-year work program of $25 million to help close those gaps. So some really big numbers are coming out in Miami, but I think the real news there is that they've bought in to the concept of all working together to create a useful network for the entire county. Of course, Miami-Dade County is the most populated county in the state of Florida as well. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and Helen, please join me on answering any questions that I might get.
Thank you so much, Ken. Sarah, do you see anything in the chat box?
There are no questions in the chat box right now. If we just want to give it a couple minutes just to see if anything else pops in. Thanks so much, Ken and Colin. Those were fabulous presentations.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions out there, I'd like to say a big thank you to our presenters today for taking the time to give your amazing presentations and for all of your continued work, effort, and support you put into the loop and trails. Once again, we'd like to recognize our sponsors. I'd like to start that list with, we missed a sponsor, sadly, in the beginning, so I'm just pulling that up. Bear with me 1 second. The Florida American Planning Association Atlantic Coast section. We are sorry that we missed you in the beginning, and we will make sure you are added into future presentations. Along with them, we'd like to thank the City of Titusville, Playland Brewing Company, Titus Landings, Lisa Mosier with Coldwell Banker Coast Realty, Wild Ocean Seafood Market, Bike Florida, Days Inn by Wyndham, Coldwell Banker Coast Realty, Titusville Area Chamber of Commerce, St. John's River to Sea Loop Alliance, the Space Coast TPO, and the Florida Office of Greenways and Trails. So next week's presentation will be on managing trails and partnerships and think regionally, plan locally. So that will be next Thursday at 10 a.m. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we hope everyone has a great rest of their day.